Yes, I just started
Hello, can you hear
recording.
me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. All right. So let's do it. So first, to start off with, Shing, I liked what you did with the SIG storage meeting. So I'll start with announcing the date. Hello everyone. Today is the 24th of February 2022. This is SIG storage cozy, uh, the container object storage interface meeting for bringing object storage standardization to Kubernetes. So I want to start off today by addressing a PR that Jiffin raised to update the code base to have all the latest specifications that we've discussed over the months. So Jiffin, did you want to go over the PR and talk about what's on it?
So based on last week meeting, I guess I pushed the changes to update the API, but I am not quite sure do I need to update the spec with this, or like I need to update the spec first then the API. So the first P commit, like it's not complete, like I need to update so this one just removes the bucket access starts from the,
Mm-hmm.
I mean bucket access request details from the API. And the first commit, like when I did the code gen, it created some modification to the existing code base. That's why the first commit has something which it was a part of the code generation. That's it. The second one is the
Okay.
actual. So yeah, this is the first step, I guess. Like after the next round, I will try to update the renaming the bucket request to bucket claim and other stuff, like updating the stats as well.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good. All right. Okay.
So
So it's a pretty straightforward update, and this is a work in progress, right? That's what you said.
Sid, like, should I need to update the spec first, or I can update the spec later after having these changes or something?
So spec is just the gRPC specification for
Yeah.
Cozy to talk to the driver. That should be orthogonal to this. That should be independent of the changes here. So it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Um, you can start with the API though. Um,
Hmm.
we generally try to take the spec changes very carefully because any existing drivers that are using the spec can get affected. Um, so so let's keep the spec update for last, and we can start with the
Sure, sure,
API
sure.
changes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you got a chance to make this PR. And Grant also said he might get some time to work on it, but I haven't seen a PR from him. I'm he's probably just busy, or he'll make the PR later on. But it's good. I'm glad we got to start on this note. Um, so so uh, so I think so far uh, we've discussed pretty much all aspects of our initial design, as in what we aim for alpha. And I think it's time, given the positive feedback from Michelle, even though it's not merged yet. I think with where we are today, um, I think it's okay to start working on the next aspects of it. Specifically, um, so there were two unanswered questions. One is regarding bucket properties. So we have kind of a vague answer around how we're going to support things like bucket versioning, um, bucket locking, object locking, or it's called worm, write once, read many, um, or policies around uh, a bucket. So say you want to set up a replication configuration on a bucket, or choose the storage class for a bucket, stuff like that. Um, so the storage class for a bucket, there's a distinction between the regular storage class that we use with file and block stores and the storage class with buckets. They're called storage classes, but we can come up with a new term too. The storage class with buckets is what kind of redundancy is applied to the objects that get stored in the bucket. So, for instance, you can choose to have enhanced redundancy or reduced redundancy. Reduced redundancy, I think, does a eventually consistent replication, and has, can lose up to, let's say it's, the object is on 10 different servers. I think can lose up to n by 2 servers or something. Enhanced redundancy is where the chance of failure is much lower, or even when things go wrong, the chance of losing data is much lower. But it comes at the cost of performance. So stuff like that. The question one is, how do we model it in the cozy workflow? And the second question is, yeah, actually, so do we even model it as typed objects? That's question one, I would say. Question two is how, because there is a simple approach here where we could just say put it all in the bucket class. That's a pretty simple answer, and it would work for alpha. And in a sense, that's okay. But I want to kind of open up the floor to everyone, hear their thoughts, or even any use cases they have around these concerns. So at NetApp, Ben, I'm sure NetApp buckets have bucket policies, right? Like, what would they be?
What you mean add their access policy?
Not access policy. So configuring the bucket itself a certain way, to say a bucket has encryption enabled or something like that, along those lines.
all the
Yeah.
opaque stuff.
There's put bucket, encryption, versioning, object lock. Those all exist in at least in NetApp storage grid.
I see. All right. So and Cozy needs to be able to configure that at the least, right? Is there any orchestration involved depending on these policies from, that would be expected from the Cozy side?
I think the stuff that's on the bucket class, the opaque params, and this is how we do it with CSI, right? You have a bunch of opaque params that just get passed down by the sidecar, and then our driver knows what to do with them. And as we want to add more features to our driver, we just add more opaque params and we document them. And Cozy doesn't need to understand how they work; it just needs to pass the strings.
Okay. I see. All right. So actually, let's start with the example of encryption. As you mentioned, I just thought of one of the requirements for encryption. So there's like 3 different styles of encryption that S3 supports. One is encryption where the client encrypts. Then
Sid, your audio is getting garbled. Can you repeat that?
There's like a.
Sid,
Okay, 1 second.
can you repeat that because your audio got garbled?
Yes. Give me 1 second.
Does anyone else have audio? Something weird is going on. The screen is all weird too.
Yeah.
I can hear you, but
Okay, we may have
Sid-
lost Sid.
okay, yeah. Also, is he sharing anything? Looks like that's fine.
It
he
was just
dropped.
frozen. And
Okay,
now it
yeah.
just dropped.
He probably need to rejoin. Satellite office also has some problems.
Oh no, maybe the power outage is getting bigger.
There he comes.
Hey, can you hear me better now?
Yes,
Yeah.
welcome back.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. Unreliable Wi-Fi here. Anyways. All right. So we were talking about encryption.
Yeah,
And
3
okay,
kinds.
So, yeah, there's 3 kinds. There's client side, there's server side, and then there's server side with an external key server. So like Vault. So client side is where the client encrypts the object and puts it into the data store. The client knows the decryption keys, the encryption keys, and gets the encrypted object back and knows how to get the real object out of that. Server side is where the server holds one key across the board for all the buckets, and it chooses, it encrypts all the objects with that. So if that key is lost, all is lost, but it's still encrypted. That's server-side encryption. And there's a last one, which is with an external key server, and that's where each object gets its own encryption key, and it needs some sort of orchestration with Vault, with an integration with an external key server. And I believe that that standard is, the way to talk to an external key server is standardized, at least for S3 encryption options. So assuming we were doing, the third kind of encryption or the second kind of encryption where it's server side or it was with the key server, we would need some amount of orchestration from Cozy. At the minimum, a secret, having an encryption key, that's one, or some form of configuration to point to the Vault server.
Wait, just for the third one, right? Because in the
For the
first
third one.
two, there's nothing for Cozy to do.
Right.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Like I just want to mention, like in the S3 request, like the header will be different. So even if Cozy, like the request will anyway reach the server at some point, right? So server can understand from the S3 request, right, whether it's need to be Vault or like
No. There are admins in the team that might want to make sure all data that's stored in a particular cluster is encrypted.
fine.
So we'll need some form of central configuration to say that anything that goes into this bucket is encrypted by default. So we need to allow admins to orchestrate that.
Yeah, but so
Now,
my thinking around this in general is that, like, well, first of all, it's not like a must-have feature, right?
These I
Like
want
it
used to.
can be added later. So like at
Yeah,
minimum, we need to
that's-
enable individual drivers to do the things that they can do without any Cozy integration, like the server-side encryption. And of course, client-side encryption doesn't require Cozy to do anything at all. It's just a client-side feature that they implement in their S3 client or on top of that. So like those are the things that we should do first. And then I think you're right that third option sounds like there's some role for something in the middle to orchestrate it. And we would obviously want that to work the same across every implementation. So like that would be like a Cozy extension that we would want to specifically design and implement on top of, Cozy once it's approved and stable. We would want to like specifically design that extension. But I wouldn't want to spend time on it before we get to that point, right? There's so many other things that are higher priority than sorting out that specific feature. But yes, something like that would make sense to specifically design into Cozy at some point.
That's fair. Someone was speaking. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we're talking about put bucket encryption, the KMS is configured at the object store level, not like, so when you put the bucket encryption, you're just telling it where to get the encryption key or what encryption key to use. I don't know how much Cozy needs to orchestrate there.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what my understanding is. Like the S3 client will specify, like the header, it will specify SSC, KMS or something like that, then the key name.
So this is just built into the S3 protocol. And
No,
Yep.
no, that's not right. So when you're providing a client-based key and the server encrypts it, that's when the header is different. When it's KMS based, the way the keys are managed is completely on the server side. So the client doesn't know anything about it. When you set up the server, you set it up, or when you set up the bucket, you set it up pointing to the KMS server along with some other configuration. So we need a way to configure that through the cozy workflow, saying that enable encryption. Maybe it's the field, or we just add a field that says encryption and type. Maybe that's all it is, but at least that much needs to be there.
Yeah, I mean, one could imagine a standard, a non-opaque field on the bucket class where if you needed to specify something that needed to get passed down, like we could define that on the bucket class.
Yeah,
There's opportunities to do. I mean, I don't want to get too much into the details of this specific feature because, like I said, I don't feel like this is a must-have thing, but there will be these kinds of things where there's some feature that we want to implement in a common way across all of the implementations, and so we'll decide to add some field to some cozy object and not make it opaque, but document how it works and then plumb it through. And maybe this is one of those cases, or maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know enough about how Azure does it, like, to know if it's different, if we'd have to do something that, if we're trying to do something universal, if that would work.
Yeah, a lot is going to depend on exactly how configurable different implementations of this feature are. Like, can you just give it an arbitrary pointer to a KMS server and say, go use this? Some backends might not support that. Some might.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about like encryption is it can be done after the bucket is created. So it could be done external to cozy.
I don't think that's true, actually. So one big problem with so much data is you can't rebalance it or go and change, configure it, go and encrypt all of the data.
No,
after.
right.
No, I think he's saying after the bucket is created, before the first object is created.
I see. Okay.
Right.
Right.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that requires some orchestration, right? Because right now you can't change anything in the bucket class in cozy.
Well, it just requires that the client can tell the server what to use.
My point was, if we're going to focus on things that need to be part of cozy, which should be something like object lock, which has to be part of the bucket create.
Right. I see where you're coming from. Yeah, that too. That also needs to be discussed. So that's where I was coming from. The bigger picture here is we need a way to specify bucket policy. That's more than just a bunch of opaque fields, because there are quite a few policy related things that are common across, I would say, all the cloud implementations and also Minio. I can't speak for Ceph, but we have a representative from Ceph who can vouch for that.
But we should go through those on a case by case basis and see how we would design them. And if the obvious answer is like, oh, it would make sense to wrap these in a policy so that they're more reusable, like we can do that. But again, I would say like that's all lower priority stuff. because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the details of exactly how those features work, and we could spend hours and hours, bike shedding on exactly how to do it.
Right.
So what would you say is the higher priority right now? I mean, other than obviously getting it merged and moving forward.
The implementation of the alpha spec, right? So we can test and build POCs on it and kick the tires. And I'm still very concerned about the downward facing interface and how pods are going to consume it, and really just working. And I to be honest, I haven't looked at the most recent iterations of how the access grant RPCs look, because that's where we had the biggest problem when we did our first POC last year. The process for granting access to a principal was very awkward, and I think it's better because we spent a lot of time on it. But I mean, just having an implementation that we can code against and try it out and say like, yeah, I like this, or no, I don't like this. That's where we need to be, is the real bread and butter of cozy, which is creating buckets and granting access to pods and then getting the pods to actually use the buckets.
Yeah, I agree. So we've already started focusing on development a little bit. Here's the tough balance that we have to strike. It's between writing code and making sure our design is accepted, because we don't want to write code that's not going to be a part of the final design.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is we want to keep the initial design that we get accepted minimal, no bells and whistles, and then implement that once it's accepted, and then add the bells and whistles.
Makes
I'm just
sense.
cognizant
Yeah.
of how long it's taken to get to the point we're at. And I know if we start talking about encryption and object locking and I'll, we'll sink a bunch of time into it.
I agree. I think that's completely fair. All right. So in terms of what we can discuss today, I still think bucket policy at least should be in the back of our minds. It's just one of the concerns that needs to be addressed after we have uh, alpha, after we reach alpha status. But I agree. There should be a focus on making sure whatever we've done so far, like getting feedback on what we've done so far, and knowing that actually works for people who are using it. So along those lines, let me ask this: how many of you represent vendors, and have you started working on drivers? I know Jiffin is working on something. I know Ben, you worked on something early on, but after that, has there been any progress? Um,
Yeah. So speaking for NetApp, we did the POC with the ONTAP S3 driver. That was I think close to a year ago, or maybe 10 months. I forget exactly how long it's been.
mhm.
And we haven't done more of that since. We've been waiting for the next iteration of the sidecars to be usable, and then we'll update that POC.
Got it. And the main feedback was it was hard to configure user um, access type, right? Like it was hard to say what kind of access would be provided for a particular.
Yeah, the process of defining a bucket access class and its contents made no sense at the time. And of course, we've been through all this, and we redesigned that. And then the specific fields that were provided to the grant access RPC and the return values also didn't they didn't comport with like what we actually needed to do, right? Because like we needed to get like I'm forgetting how this.
Oh, I can remind you.
Yeah.
So in the bucket access class, there's a opaque map string field, and somehow you'll have to pass provider specific access definition through that. So for instance, in Amazon, the provider specific way to define access is through IAM policy. And you'll have to somehow get an IAM policy into that map string field. And
No, this was about the like the minting of a access key and a secret key, and then how we return those back to Cozy so that Cozy can persist them in a place where the pod will be able to use them. Like I think that it was the basic plumbing of, how do you get a secret key and an access key out of the driver into Cozy, through that gRPC interface. It didn't make sense.
yeah, that part has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, so like that was where all the rough edges were, as far as we concerned. Like creating buckets and deleting buckets, like that all worked fine because it's pretty straightforward how you do that. But granting the access and then revoking the access, the gRPC felt very awkward, and that's of course the other half of what a driver has to do. So the create delete part was easy, and the grant and deny was hard. And hopefully the next iteration will go more smoothly there. But like I said, I haven't actually looked at the gRPC code in a long time. So
Yeah. So the changes that have come in there are around grant access specifically are we we just provide a policy now. We earlier we had the support of we had the support for choosing an existing user, and I think that made the design unnecessarily complex. Now we just provide a policy, and we said for each bucket access we create a new service, like cloud service account, not a service account Kubernetes, but the equivalent of a user for applications in the cloud, in the providers, in the object storage providers. So once we went to that model, we didn't have to have references to the user in the way we were doing it, the more complex way, uh, which was I think we had a way to specify who the user was going to be and what policy they get upfront. And now it's just the policy. A new user gets created, and how the user gets how the user ID is used, and how the user is the life cycle of that user itself is completely opaque to the user, to someone who's using Cozy. Wow, there's too many user words here. I think it's gotten simpler, even though it's kind of complicated to explain.
Yeah, I mean, so is the sidecar in shape where like we could update that POC again, or does it need to be rewritten?
I'll have to see what state it was in before, but I can work with you on that.
Okay, I mean, I can't guarantee like we'll be able to turn the crank on another POC soon, but like
I don't think you should either. I think
we're not even going to
wait.
think about it until like the dependencies are there.
Right. I think you should. I think it's better to wait until it's a little more solid. We have a little more. I mean, we have the design acceptance, and we have code in a much better shape. But I would still like to know where if from your POC, what was the state of things? Because it is important to address these concerns, especially around passing in access policy through the bucket access class. I don't think that part, just the way in which we pass the access policy hasn't changed fundamentally. I think how we did user management has changed, but how we passed in access policy just has not changed. So if you wanted to say give access through this bucket access class, where people can only write 1,000 objects, or if you wanted to have a specific access policy, you'll have to somehow encode that entire policy inside the
BAC, right?
Yeah, inside the map string, right, the BAC.
But it's, from Cozy's perspective, it's opaque. So like the NetApp driver can define the way that you define NetApp access policies, and then the Ceph driver can define the way you define Ceph access policies, and we don't have to agree with each other, right?
Right, exactly. But
yeah. So that's a good state of affairs from the perspective of writing a POC, because it means we can define, we can make it as big or as small as we want. We can just do what makes sense.
Right, but there are some concerns around it, like I'll tell you the one thing I don't like about that approach. You're going to have to base 64 encode it, or some form of encoding, at least escape spaces or something, while putting it in the map string, and it's not readable.
Well, so, if you want to cram like a whole JSON blob in there, yeah.
There is no other way to specify a policy. Oh, okay.
I'm saying that we can decide just to have very, very simple predefined policies, like read only, read write, yada yada, just simple strings that mean things that we know or document on the back end, and then you can have some other mechanism of plugging in those policies on the back end, so that they don't have to be passed through Cozy. Cozy can just select from a menu that the driver knows about.
We can't do that because of portability. So if a driver was able to define what fields there were, which is what I'm assuming you're saying, then each, like, even if it's just for S3 going from
but that's what opaque means, right? Opaque means that it's not portable. It's NetApp specific. Like we define a set of keys and values that only make sense for the NetApp driver, and
yeah. So
and you can design keys and values that make sense for your driver, and then you put them in your documentation, and we put them in our documentation. The whole point is it's a class, right? It's something the admin creates for the end users to select from. End users don't create these things, so there's no portability concern at the class layer. It's something you select from. Yeah. And then now I do take your point that, like, to the extent that these things can be made common and portable, they should be. but I'm saying that's a very hard thing to get right from the beginning. And a simple, just, an opaque string map that Cozy doesn't do anything with is way easier to deal with for version 0.1. And then if we want to design something that actually isn't opaque, but is widely supported, then we can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, if we were to try to do the other thing where we try to find that balance between what Cozy defines and what should be just an opaque string, I think, like you said, it's very hard upfront, at least. I mean, even in the long run, it's very hard, even with all the feedback we can get from users. The hardest thing is trying to maintain compatibility between multiple vendors or multiple different providers. That's going to be very hard, and not getting into the game is probably the right answer here.
I think the starting place is you just make it opaque, you leave it up to the vendors. We'll go do our things, and then we'll come back together after we all have working implementations, and we'll figure out what we have in common. It's just so hard to talk about what we have in common before we have working implementations.
Right. Okay. It's good to hear that, because now we can redefine our goals, and I think not redefine, but kind of focus on other aspects of Cozy, the life cycle, which is development again. About 10 months ago, that was our focus, where we were pushing hard to get a working implementation, and we had one. But we've had significant changes in design, so we had to stop that. I think we're at a point again where we can focus on development and get something out, so people can play with it. I think so. Last time we had help from a lot of volunteers, and this time I think people start signing up as we go along. But even otherwise, I can help, and we have Jiffin and Grant last time said he can help out, and anyone else who can find time should be able to help out. We know who's here, and if you just have some time to write code, I humbly request you to help out with Cozy. But I think we should be good on the development front, at least in terms of the effort we can put in. I think we have enough to start off. So we can start defining development goals then. So I'm looking at this more of as a planning meeting, trying to figure out what we all need to align on. What's the next big thing that we need to focus on, because our current thing, which is getting the KEP merged, or getting the design right, getting the KEP merged, we're just gated on our reviewers availability, and we can't do anything about that. But what we can control is our next priority, which is actually getting a working solution in place. So unless anyone has any objections, I would like to start focusing on, or anyone thinks there's some other higher priority thing. I think I would like to focus on development, actually, so that people can try it out. Any thoughts on that? Like, Ben, would you like, development is probably the right thing to do here, right?
Yeah, that's what I would push for, is get the current design approved, implemented, and I wouldn't necessarily wait for the approval to implement it.
Right.
Some parts are obvious, we just do them. For things where there's legitimate questions, maybe hold off on those. But
fair enough. Yeah. All right. So that's kind of where we started last week, but it's good to kind of to say it explicitly, that this is our goal. So we can start working on it. So things like policy, there's a lot of bucket policy related things, and I'm pretty sure we'll have to discuss it. I don't think it will be opaque for the entirety of all the policies that bucket support. So I think bucket policies is something that we'll keep revisiting. There's that, and there's also we still haven't really flushed out accessing buckets across namespaces. I think we made progress halfway, and I think we had a decent design to start out with. But that's the other priority. It's okay to not start a discussion on that right now. But that's another thing that we need to focus on at some point. Just fine-grained access, or just access control across namespaces for buckets.
I thought that we did have something we were fairly happy with, because we did spend a huge amount of time on that.
Right. But I don't think it's fully flushed out. So the reason I didn't want to start right away is I wanted to go back and visit where we were, and that document that we had kind of where is the SIG storage? Yeah, this one. Yeah, so this one has info about what those what the last agreement was. Yes, from January, but it was from earlier this year. So we should be able to revisit and remember what exactly that was. But before getting it all back into context, I don't want to get into the discussion on that.
Okay.
But from where we were, from what I remember best, I don't think we fully fleshed it out. I think we found an approach that worked for most cases, and or yeah, which seemed very promising, and we kind of left it at that.
Yeah, I thought that it was 99% the way there. I don't, I
Right. That's
I
what
can't
it
think
felt
of a
like.
specific case that wasn't covered by the proposal. But
Right. Yep. It was a very simple one. But I want.
my bias is towards like having the code first, and then once you have the code, then you write the design. Because it's very easy to write a design that doesn't make any sense, right? And then when you start coding it, you're like, wait a minute, this is weird. But like once you have code that actually does the thing that says that you want to do, then you can just write down what you did and call that the design. And then maybe it needs to be tweaked if there's, you know, specific corner cases you didn't think about. But I don't know. I would say there's no reason not to just take a swing at that and implement what we wrote down. And then, you know, if people can point out reasons why it has problems, then we'll go fix them.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All of my best designs have been when I
First.
wrote the code first, and then I wrote down what I did in the design doc.
I think the reason we have design meetings is so that we get everyone's requirements or concerns captured. Just so that, because we have different vendors represented here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying like don't have the meetings and don't gather all the requirements and think it through. I'm just saying at a certain point, it's just time to start coding.
Yeah. I think we're there. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So let's start focusing on coding again. This is the this part is going to be a little bit easier, because code is like math. We already know what the right answer is, as in there's a right answer at least. So we given the design that we have now, we can write code to get it to the point where we match what we have now, and as things change, we can adapt it. So so it's good that Jiffin has started on API, and he's going to look at the spec. I can actually start looking at the controllers, and all of us together, I think we should be able to get something working fairly soon, within a month or 2 months time. I don't think it should take very long.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so that's all I have from my side. Unless anyone wants to bring something up, you can have 14 or 13 minutes of your time back.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sid.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.